very good afternoon to all of you. I am Dr. Aparna Sharma. I am additional professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. This is the third webinar in the series of webinars being conducted by the WHO Collaborating Center as a part of mother and child care during the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot has been said on this topic, and yet a lot more needs to be done as the number of cases are increasing day by day. So today we are talking about the facility preparedness at a tertiary level and the changes that we need to bring about in our day-to-day life and our routine practice. For this we have with us Dr. Anubhuti Rana, Assistant Professor in our department. Following the webinar, we will have a panel discussion by experts from gynecology, also from microbiology and from WHO, who will be discussing pertinent points related to this topic. And we hope that you will find this webinar useful. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Anubhuti Rana, Assistant Professor in Department of Obs and Gynae at AIIMS New Delhi. The topic for today's webinar is Facility Preparedness at Tertiary Level during the COVID-19 pandemic. Pregnant women need different levels of care during antenatal period, intrapartum period and the postnatal period. So the facility has to be prepared to provide a good quality care to the pregnant woman. So at the beginning, it is important to set up a task force within the healthcare facility which will understand the resources needed, which will find solutions to the various challenges and resolve crises by shared decision making. It is also important to set up a departmental nodal team within the Obs Gynae department which will perform the above tasks within the department and coordinate with the task force. The role of the departmental nodal team is very important. It will help in establishing screening and triage protocols and determine testing strategy for pregnant women. It will ensure appropriate isolation of pregnant patients who have suspected or confirmed COVID-19 and help in training of all healthcare personnel on-site and online to adhere to infection prevention and control practices and rational use of PPE. They will also strengthen infection prevention and control measures and develop a supply and procurement distribution plan for PPE and biomedical equipment. One of the most important roles is to communicate with the staff about the facility preparedness. The five-pronged approach for any facility preparedness includes formulating the SOP, reorganizing the infrastructure, rational use of PPE, managing the healthcare personnel, and implementing infection control practices. The first step is formulating the SOPs. Each facility should formulate an SOP as applicable to local setup and resources. The definition of a COVID suspect or a confirmed case, the patient flow, the area management, and the human resource management should be clearly outlined in any SOP. As per the SOP used in AIIMS, a COVID suspect is a patient with acute respiratory illness, with no other etiology and a history of travel or residence in country or area reporting local transmission of COVID-19 during last 14 days prior to symptom onset, or a patient with ARI and who has been in contact with a confirmed or a probable COVID-19 case in the last 14 days prior to onset of symptoms, or a patient with severe ARI requiring hospitalization and no other etiology, or any patient coming in from a hotspot requiring admission to labor room even if asymptomatic. COVID positive is defined as a patient who has confirmed report on laboratory tests. The patient workflow should be clearly determined in the SOP. Where will the patient be admitted? What to do if she needs a cesarean section, a normal delivery, how the sample will be sent, and what will be the outcome when the sample report is available, whether the patient is positive, where will she be shifted to a designated positive center, or if the report is negative, where the care of will be continued. The second part is reorganization of the infrastructure. This is most important because we need to determine where the care of the pregnant woman will be done. So for this, at the beginning, we need a screening and a triage area before entry into any healthcare facility. If the screen is negative, the patient goes to non-COVID labor room. If the patient is a suspect, then the patient goes to a suspect facility. And if the patient is positive, then they go to a designated area. So this means that we need 3 facilities for the care of pregnant women. So at the beginning of setting up of triage area, it should be set up at the entry in the hospital in a well ventilated space, and social distancing should be maintained in this area also by marking circular areas of appropriate distance. Screening should be done for all patients, visitors and healthcare personnel upon entry into the healthcare facility. They should be screened using a standard questionnaire which comprises of a detailed history of TOCC and clinical manifestations, that is, history of travel, history of occupation, history of significant contact, history of cluster or resident of hotspot area, or symptoms of fever, myalgia, cough, sore throat, difficulty in breathing. The visitors also need to be screened, and the policy should be that we should limit the visitors, give face masks to all the visitors, preferably counsel that the same person can be the attendant throughout the hospital stay, and use alternative mechanism for patient-visitor interaction like a video call. The healthcare workers need to be screened, and it depends on the institution policies. They should monitor themselves for fever or any symptoms of COVID-19 and stay home if ill. A register can be maintained with the mention of symptoms which will be kept outside each clinical area, and the staff can fill the column in the page daily. This can also be used as an approach for screening healthcare workers. Coming to establishing a COVID suspect facility, it should be established in away from the main labor room in an adequate space with a separate air conditioning. We need to know that at first there should be a separate area for the entry of doctors as demarcated by this arrow. There could be a separate entry for the patients, a separate donning area, a doffing area. A suspect facility should also have an OT in case a pregnant woman requires a cesarean, and finally the exit at the end. Patients should be transported through service corridors and not corridors which are publicly accessible. There should be strategically placed lifts away from the other lifts, and the corridors and nominated lifts should be cleaned following the transit of a suspect patient. The initial evaluation of a suspect pregnant patient should be done in an area in the suspect facility which is separate from all these rooms. They should have a good ventilation system and an adequate space for physical examination with probably a portable ultrasound machine and a CTG machine. The workflow of the patient should be unidirectional for both patient and healthcare personnel, from the donning area to the labor room, to the doffing area, shower area and the exit. There should be creation of isolation room for the patients, which should be single occupancy airborne infection isolation rooms with closed doors and dedicated bathrooms. It is desirable for patients requiring specially aerosolization procedures. However, the specimen collection for respiratory viral pathogens can be done in isolation room, not necessarily in an A2 room. But in resource-constrained settings, these isolation rooms may not be created. So the approach is that all suspect cases can be cohorted in the same ward with a very good ventilation and standalone air conditioning with 12 or more air changes per hour. If AC is not available, we can put 3 or 4 exhaust fans driving air out of the room, and a minimum distance of 1 meter should be put between adjacent beds, and at all times patients should wear a triple layer surgical mask. Similarly, a designated COVID positive facility needs to be created for treatment in the health facilities. Same airborne infection isolation rooms should be created for the patients. There should be separate entry, exit points, corridors, nominated lifts, separate for patients and doctors. There should be an area for donning and a separate area for doffing with provision of showers and geysers, a separate area for post-operative care, an area for keeping incubators and warmers for baby, and implementation of all IPC interventions. Coming to the third part of facility preparedness is rational use of PPE. It should be ensured that the PPE is available at all times, and the rational use should be ensured by the Hospital Infection Control Committee. There should be visual aids like posters to guide the staff for proper use of donning and doffing, and we should maintain an adequate stock at all times. At all times, we should also know that in spite of PPE, if we are doing a sterile procedure, then sterile gown and sterile gloves to be used in addition for procedures that require aseptic precautions. The types of PPE depend on whether it is only a gown-based PPE kit, which is a level 1, which includes a gown, an N95 mask, goggles and gloves. It could be a level 2 PPE, which is a coverall-based PPE, and the coverall is made of the same material as of the gown in level 1. However, it also includes long shoe covers along with the kit 1. The level 3 is the highest level, which is again a coverall based PPE, but it is made of recyclable material used for coveralls, and it comprises of coverall, N95 mask, goggles, long shoe cover and gloves. The face shields are very important in today's practice, as they should be used for all aerosol generating procedures and even sampling of pregnant women with suspected COVID-19 infection. Coming to the rational use. So in the screening area, N95 mask and gloves must be used. For the non-COVID labor room, for minor procedures like MTP, a level 1 PPE would suffice. For vaginal delivery, all doctors must wear level 1 PPE. For cesarean delivery, level 2 PPE is recommended. In the suspect labor room, during examination and nasopharyngeal sampling, level 2 kit will be required. For vaginal delivery or cesarean section, level 3 kit is recommended with a waterproof apron, sterile impervious gloves, impervious shoe covers, long boots and face shields. And even the support staff for cleaning and disinfection should wear complete complement of PPE. For a COVID positive patient, level 3 kit is the kit which is recommended. Coming to the fourth part, that is management of personnel. The components of personnel management are staggered staffing and making a detailed roster, staff training and stress management. When it comes to making a staff roster, we must keep in mind that the area pertaining to each staff should have a staggered staffing. So there should be a staff roster for a triage area, for a suspect labor room, for a non-COVID area and for a COVID area. And the aim to make a staff roster is to ensure staff continuity, prevent exposure to all and ensure adequate rest for all. So the workplace segregation that can be done in an obstetric unit could be that the staff could be divided into 3 teams, that is non-COVID duty, COVID suspect team and COVID response team, which will look after their particular areas so that to maintain the continuity of care for a pregnant woman. There should be minimal physical contact between the teams in and out of the hospital, which would reduce the risk of cross-infection also. The staff needs to be trained in practices that prevent the spread of COVID-19 within the health facility, including infection control and biomedical waste management. They should be able to identify and isolate patients with possible COVID-19. They should care for patients with confirmed or suspected COVID-19. They should know the rational use of PPE, and there should be regular reinforcements of the staff and update on the current knowledge and the SOP. For the training purposes, the on-site training can be done by displaying posters outside labor rooms, the antenatal ward and the suspect areas, which could be reinforced by the consultants on call at rounds. Another thing which we could do is mock drills or walkthroughs for patient interaction, especially during triage, and communication with patient and relatives about their being suspect or positive. Online training can also be used in today's world with audiovisual platforms which display important patient and staff awareness videos in areas of triage and patient-bearing areas. Online teaching modules can be prepared and an interactive session on a web platform can be done after completion of the basic module. A very important component for the staff management is stress management. There should be communication with all levels of healthcare workers and regularly address their concerns and generally keep their morale high by constant motivation and appreciation. Coming to the last part of facility preparedness, which is very important, is infection prevention and control practices. There are various interventions to reduce transmission, like early identification and isolation of patients with suspected disease, use of appropriate PPE and their proper disposal, environmental disinfection, biomedical waste management, and protocols for accidental or inadvertent exposure of healthcare worker to a positive case with or without PPE. So what should be the PPE for a biomedical waste disposal, cleaning and disinfection in COVID-19 designated areas? The personnel must wear outer heavy-duty gloves, inner disposable gloves, water-resistant gown, goggles, N95 mask and long rubber boots. Donning and doffing should be done as per protocol in the designated areas only. We can keep 3 red bins in which we can discard the PPE. So in bin 1, there could be goggles and face shields which could be reused after immersing in 0.5% sodium hypochlorite solution for 10 minutes and wiped with 70% alcohol swab. The N95 mask and coveralls have to be stored in double bags and handed over twice daily to the authorized staff from sanitation and housekeeping services, and the disposable PPE should also be handed over to the authorized waste collecting staff. The environmental cleaning and surface disinfection of room while the patient is admitted is very important. Before starting the disinfection, we must seal off the contaminated area, wear an appropriate PPE and rinse buckets with hot water. The disinfectants which can be used are 1% sodium chloride, which is freshly prepared for each use and has a contact time of at least 10 minutes, or 70% alcohol, which is isopropyl or ethyl alcohol, especially for delicate instruments like thermometers, stethoscopes, BP cuff, etc. And apply these disinfectants using a damp cloth in a steady sweeping motion. You should not spray pack or splash because it will cause aerosol generation. Remove the curtains, fabrics and quilts for washing in hot watery laundry cycle with detergent or bleach in water at 70 degrees Celsius for at least 25 minutes. Mop the floor and wipe down all accessible surfaces of floor, furniture, fittings, windows, all surfaces of bed and mattresses with 1% hypochlorite, and wipe on high touch surfaces with 1% hypochlorite or 70% alcohol. What should be the frequency of cleaning of surfaces? So for high touch surfaces like doorknobs, telephone, bed rails, light switches, in the clinical areas where suspected or confirmed case is present, it should be done 1 to 2 hourly. However, in where there are no suspected cases, it can be done 2 to 3 hourly. In non-clinical areas, it should be done 3 to 4 hourly. For low touch surfaces like walls and mirrors, mopping should be done, and in case where a suspected case is kept, it should be done 2 to 3 hourly. Where no suspected case is kept, it should be done 3 to 4 hourly, and in non-clinical areas, it should be done once per shift. Another important component is terminal disinfection after a patient expires, is discharged or shifted. In addition to all the measures described previously, fogging with H2O2 based disinfectant with a contact time of 30 minutes is very important, and after completion of fogging, the room has to be closed for 45 minutes for the mist to settle down, and once again all the surfaces have to be wiped with a clean duster. So based on this 5-pronged approach, let's look at the reorganization of care for pregnant women at tertiary care hospital with inpatient care in antenatal ward, intrapartum care in non-COVID labor room and intrapartum care in COVID suspect labor room. So first is inpatient care in antenatal ward. An SOP should be clear for the screening of all the patients before entering the antenatal ward. The personnel have to be trained and educated. There should be a staff roster for the duties and stress management protocols. We should know our PPE. What we need in the antenatal ward is a gown, a glove and N95 mask. At all times, we have to reinforce adherence to standard precautions. And we should know our infection prevention and control practices for cleaning and disinfection in non-COVID ward and cleaning and disinfection of medical equipment in the ward. For intrapartum care in non-COVID labor room, the SOP should be again clear for who will enter the labor room and who will not enter the non-COVID labor room. The personnel again need to be trained and educated. A dedicated roster needs to be made. We should know our PP in labor room for mode of vaginal delivery or for cesarean delivery and take all precautions at all times. And again adhere to standard precautions in the non-COVID labor room like hand hygiene, clean and reprocess patient shared equipment, follow respiratory etiquettes and adequate disposal of waste. What about intrapartum care in COVID suspect labor room? So in this labor room, this SOP has to be very detailed about what will be the donning and doffing in the designated area, what will be the management of a suspect ANC patient, where the patient will be examined, how the sample will be taken, how the sample will be sent, and what will happen if the report is negative or positive. The infrastructure of suspect labor room has to be reorganized by creating isolation rooms and unidirectional movement of staff and patients. We should know our PPE in the suspect labor room, which is a level 2 or 3 PPE, and proper donning and doffing of this PPE is more important. The personnel need to be trained and educated. A staff roster needs to be made, and stress management strategies are key here. Very important are IPC practices in suspect labor room, because we should have a checklist for cleaning and disinfection of services. Every 2 hourly, the floors and rest all surfaces as described previously need to be cleaned, and there needs to be a protocol for terminal cleaning after a discharge or shifting of a patient. Precautions need to be taken after the cleanup and disinfection, like simple hand hygiene with hand soap and water immediately after work is completed. And in case the staff has any symptoms, they should report there to their in charge if they develop any symptoms. Reinforce adherence to standard precautions time to time. And most important is routine biomedical waste management in double bagging and labeling as COVID waste. So the 5-step approach to facility preparedness is formulating the SOP, reorganizing the infrastructure, procuring and rational use of PPE, management of healthcare personnel at all levels, and establishing infection prevention and control practices. Thank you. Good afternoon. Most important is routine biomedical. ये ठीक से नहीं हो रहा है ना, आप इधर आ जाओ, आप दिखने में थोड़ा सा चेयर शिफ्ट करो ना, आप इधर आ जाओ, it is more Good afternoon, everyone. We will now take up some questions. We have an expert panel from AIIMS. We have Dr. Gagandeep, consultant microbiology. We have Dr. Aparna Sharma, consultant from Department of Obs Gynae. We have Dr. Seema Singhal, consultant from Department of Obs and Gynae. And we have Dr. Priya, an expert from WHO. So we have a first question that in this current scenario, a mask and hand hygiene are the most important for our protection. Can you please, sir, guide us about the SOP regarding good practices of using a mask?
Okay, so basically, one needs to choose, if you're talking about an N95, you need to choose the N95 that fits you best, because the most important thing about an N95, in addition to the filtering layers, is the fit. So because we need to prevent the droplets and the droplet nuclei from going inside, so the fit is the most important thing of an N95. And whenever you wear an N95, after wearing, you must make sure by pressing the nose pins and taking shape of your nose and the shape of your face, so that the fit is good. And once you've worn it properly, you should always have a seal check by blowing out air forcefully, and it should not leak from any side of the N95. So that is an important thing about wearing an N95. Even if you're wearing a triple layer mask, again, it's important that the triple layer mask should have a nose pin so as to provide you a good fit, and it should be it should cover. I see people wearing triple layer masks where they keep it below the nose and they're not properly fitting. So those things have to be taken care of. The masks should cover the area right from the nose till the chin, so that it provides proper protection. And as you spoke about hand hygiene, again, hand hygiene with the alcohol-based hand rubs is supposed to be better, because they can be placed conveniently, the compliance rate is much higher, and the duration required is much lesser, again leading to a much better compliance. So soap and water can also be used if your hands are visibly dirty with body fluids, or there's a major contamination. So
thank you, sir. We have another question, sir. What is the role of respirators in the current day?
Actually, respirators, it's a sort of a misnomer which people probably don't understand. All these are the N95s are all respirators only, filtering face piece respirators they are known as. So N95s in general definitely provide a much better protection. And probably, are you talking about the valves, or so the expiratory valves uh, can only be or should only be used in areas where you are providing protection to yourself. If at all, supposedly you're working in an OT where you need to protect the area being operated upon, there the valves with the masks with valves should be avoided. So because all expired air will directly be on the operating area, so those are the areas where that should be avoided. Otherwise, definitely having a valve avoids hypercapnia, and comfort level is much higher when using the valve.
Thank you, sir. We have another question. What is the rational use of PP during vaginal deliveries and cesarean in a suspect patient, ma'am?
Right. So I think, as has been shown previously, we have to decide if currently, with the increasing number of cases, I think it's very important that we start taking universal precautions. Every patient who's coming to labor room should be thoroughly screened with a history. And if the patient is a suspect or a COVID positive, then for a normal vaginal delivery, a precaution should include a mask, N95 mask if it is available, and a face shield. And then we should also wear a gown, an impermeable gown. Along with that, we should have gloves, and we should wear boots or a shoe cover. So I think this is the basic precaution that we should take while we are conducting a delivery, and including a cesarean. So we have to take care that we are taking all possible respiratory and droplet precautions when we are conducting a vaginal delivery or a cesarean section. So when we are talking about a level 2 or a level 3 PPE, it is essentially your availability of the kind of PPE that is there within our setups. But essentially, it is very important to use a good mask with a face shield when we are doing these procedures.
Thank you. Now, I would like to ask, there's another question, ma'am. How to segregate the flow of pregnant patients upon entry to a healthcare facility?
Preparedness for a healthcare facility, whether it is a low volume facility or a high volume facility, is essential. We have to first stratify our facility into three areas, like triage area, where the patients will be first coming, and the COVID positive area, and the COVID suspect area, and the low risk area. So if we stratify our facility into these stratifications, that would be useful for our staff, because the roster of the staff can be managed, the PPE levels can be accordingly sorted out at the facility, and also the patients, the infection, cross infection from patient to patient will also be prevented. Another important thing is, in all these facilities, it is very important to display what should be done and what should not be done, so that we can continue the reinforcement among our workers and also among patients about the good practices. So that is very important. And apart from that, a predefined SOPs should be there in each area. For example, I would like to highlight special triage areas, where we make a team, and we can make them sit down. We can train those teams in like communication, how to communicate with empathy to the patients, so that we ask them few questions, like whether you have some symptoms. We all know the symptoms of COVID infection. We can ask them, are they from some containment area, or have they got some exposure to something. So if we ask these questions from them, then we have to know how to communicate, how to reduce their anxiety also, without creating any panic among the patients. So this kind of stratification will be useful to kind of prevent infections.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question we have is, we have an expert from WHO. So, what is the role of WHO in maintaining essential services in COVID-19 in a healthcare facility?
Thank you for that question. I think WHO's primary role has always been providing normative guidance and supporting ministries of health as well as collaborating centers such as AIMS in ensuring that essential health services are available, and they have the exact evidence-based guidelines that is needed. Only yesterday, on 27th of May, WHO released its new interim guidance on case management for COVID-19 patients. This includes pregnancy management. It also has some additional material related to how to manage the facility in terms of oxygenator availability, as well as what are the essential annexes and protocols that are needed for facility preparedness. In addition to that, WHO India at the moment is also working with the Ministry of Health and other partners to look at whether essential health services, particularly for pregnancy, are available in district level facilities, and making sure that they have the kind of guidance and technical support that is needed to maintain that. Thank you.
We have another question. Sir, is N95 mask recyclable for 2 to 3 days?
Mm,
Reusable?
Actually, there are multiple guidelines from CDC, and there's one term known as extended use. By extended use, we mean that we can use the same N95 for maybe 6 to 8 hours. Then there's another term known as limited reuse, where you can use the same mask and it can be used, time and again. Like if you take a set of 5 masks, you label them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you use the first one on the first day, second one on the second day, and so on and so forth. And on the 6th day, you use the first mask. And what we have to do is, one important thing we need to take care is that in between, once you've used a mask, it should be stored properly in a breathable paper bag, so that the mask dries up, and it will take care of decreasing the viral load on the surface of the mask. So this is limited reuse. If we talk about reprocessing of a mask, there are multiple types of N95 available in the market right now. So only the ones which are good quality masks, like the ones available from 3M. Even the US FDA has a protocol where you can expose these to hydrogen peroxide vapors, and they can be disinfected and reused if there is a dearth of supply.
Thanks. Ma'am, we have another question.
Good afternoon.
That, since staff preparedness is the key for a health facility preparedness, what are the methods for training the staff in the current scenario?
Yes, I think this is one aspect that needs to be taken up very, very urgently in most of the institutes and facilities. The staff training, first of all, we need to decide whom are we training. So it has to not just include the doctors, because every healthcare worker is currently at risk and should know how to manage. So it should include the doctors, the staff nurses, the technical officers, the sanitation officers, and the security guards. So these are the 5 cadres that should be included for training. The second question is, how should we train? So depending on the facilities available, currently it should be on-site training along with an online training if available in this time of COVID. Anything which is online is preferable. Then the third aspect is, what should be trained? So one is a basic module of COVID, which should include the techniques of hand washing, using a mask, what is about the PPE usage, which PPE to use where. So these are the basic things, and also biomedical waste disposal and infection control modules. So these are the basic modules which should be given for all cadres of healthcare providers. In addition, for obstetric residents and staff nurses especially, the module should include a management of pregnant lady who's a confirmed case or a suspect case, or any patient who's coming in labor with COVID-19. So, and also we should have some role of how to actually handle patients in this time, and we should, so that we stick to our respectful maternity care. So this is what we have done, and we have created modules which include a basic knowledge on COVID. The second is SOP of obstetric management, and the third is drills on how to conduct yourself with a patient when you are thinking that she's a suspect, or how to conduct the screening of a pregnant woman who's coming to a triage. So I think these are the components of the training. The second aspect is the on-site training, which should include regular reinforcement that employee screening should be done, that the ward disinfection of the ward should be carried out, the checklist should be followed, hand hygiene and sanitation should be followed. So I think on-site plus online training should be done, and the nodal officers or somebody should be in charge who should be really taking care that these things are being done.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there is another question that, as you mentioned, healthcare personnel need to be screened. So how should they be screened upon entering the healthcare facility?
See, screening all the health professionals who are entering the health facility every day is a mandatory exercise. These healthcare professionals include all the levels of professionals, including doctors, nurses, your hospital attendants, orderlies, sweepers, even guards. So all of these people should be screened every day. And for that, the onus, it has to be shared amongst the various strata of people. Like doctors will have to take onus of screening amongst the doctors. So for that, a predefined questionnaires can be drafted depending on the facility. For example, are you suffering from any symptoms like cold, cough, fever? Did you have fever in last 24 hours? If there is some doubt, then recording of temperature should be done. Where are they coming from? Are they coming from some containment area? Is there any history of any personal exposure? Somebody's spouse, somebody's relative, are they having some COVID infection? So all these histories, if we take daily from these patients, these healthcare professionals, that would help us to identify the ones who are really at high risk and who can be, can be prevented from coming to the facility for a while they are being tested or like that. Thank you, Ms. So there is another question. How do we set up an isolation room for a suspect patient and a separate AC facility for the patient?
Okay. So as far as the isolation facility is concerned, ideally, whenever we talk about respiratory pathogens, there should be, this area should be sort of separated from, should be separate from the general flow of patients, or it may be at one end of the ward or in a separate area. And this should have an attached washroom facility so that the patient doesn't need to move out. Then the air conditioning, as far as respiratory pathogen is concerned, like this one, there should be a negative pressure air conditioning in that area. And whenever you are going inside the isolation room, the healthcare worker needs to don appropriate PP, and there should be also an attached doffing area in that isolation ward.
Thank you.
So I think there are a lot of more questions which are coming in. So one more question, sir, is Dr. Gagandeep, is how can we know that the sanitizer is effective? Is there an answer to that question?
Actually, we at the user end, it's very difficult to evaluate whether the sanitizer is really working or not. What we can really do is make sure that the concentrations we are using are appropriate. So there is enough scientific data which is there, which shows that if you are using an appropriate disinfectant, it will be effective. So like hypochlorite, 0.5 to 1%, we say it's very well. It does take care of COVID. In addition, it does take care of Clostridium difficile and other hospital-acquired infections as well. Alcohol, again, you need to rely on. It should be from a supplier who's reliable and who is, supplying what he is writing on the label, that it's 70% alcohol.
Right. So the next question, thank you. So the next question is that is RT-PCR necessary for every patient? So
RT-PCR basically is detecting the RNA. So if you are talking about making a diagnosis, definitely RT-PCR is the answer, because by the time we also have some antibody tests available in the market, but by the time the antibody becomes positive, it takes at least almost week, 10 days, and maybe longer in case of COVID. That is what there is evidence in literature. So RT-PCR is necessary for making a diagnosis, but as we've seen that even the MOHFW discharge guidelines have changed, and really we don't need, for discharging the patient, we don't need in mild to moderate cases, maybe in severe cases it is required. So for picking up the RNA, definitely RT-PCR is the answer.
And what about TrueNAT?
TrueNAT again is it's a modification of the real-time PCR only. So it's, be it TrueNAT, be it the GeneXpert, all are modifications of the real-time PCR. So they're detecting RNA.
That is acceptable to.
Absolutely.
Right, but if the TrueNAT becomes positive, we need to confirm it by RT-PCR.
No, not really. The TrueNAT that is now available has, it's using multiple genes. So you have the screening gene as well as the confirmatory gene. So you don't need to really reconfirm using the real-time PCR.
Right. So, Dr. Anubhuti, I would like to ask that are we allowed to breastfeed a mother, or breastfeed a baby who's born to a COVID positive mother? I think we've had this discussion in every forum, but I think this is a question that keeps coming back to us. So let's have the answer once again. Yeah.
So, yes, we are allowed to breastfeed. A COVID positive mother can breastfeed her baby. But the important thing to remember is that the virus is not secreted in the breast milk. So whenever the mother is breastfeeding, they need to take some precautions, like they need to cover their face with a mask, they need to practice hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, and with adequate precautions in discussion with your neonatologist, you can breastfeed the baby.
Thank you. So, Dr. Priya, I think there are some requests that is there a website from where we can get all this information regarding a pregnant mother or baby and regarding the obstetrics and COVID-19?
Yes, Dr. Panna, thank you for that question. So there is a website that all of this material and information is available. If you'd like to view these webinars, they are available on the AIMS telemedicine portal. Links to all of this material is also available on the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare's website, as well as WHO collates all of this information and it's readily available and freely available for everybody to use. So all of those websites are good resource centers, and if additionally required, we will.
Thank you, Dr. Priya. There's one question that what are the guidelines for term patients for COVID testing, or only patients who are from red zone and who are suspect should be tested? So, Anubhuti, would you like to take that question?
So the guidelines keep on evolving every day, and we need to adapt to the changing guidelines. But the current guidelines that were last updated were that all patients who have who are COVID suspect. So the definition of a COVID suspect is based on the criteria that we mentioned, that is TOCC, whether there is a history of travel, an occupation, she's from a cluster or containment zone, or she has any clinical symptoms like fever or respiratory illness. So based on these conditions, they need to be tested. Even asymptomatic patients from a hotspot area should be tested, because we are finding that increasingly in asymptomatic patients are turning out to be positive. But as of now, further universal testing for all patients who are entering labor room is still not clear.
Yeah, I think we will have to see how the guidelines evolve. But currently, we are testing suspects who are symptomatic or coming in from hotspots, although the latest ICMR guidelines have varied that a bit also. But this is what we are currently following. Now, there is one question which has come up, is that what is the ideal mask for a common man? I think that's a very, very important question. They might not have a 3-ply mask or an N95 mask available. So, for a common man who's not coming to a healthcare facility, what is the ideal mask?
So, as you know, we are wearing masks for two purposes. One is protecting ourselves from the droplets which may be infective, and even sometimes they can act as source control for the patient. So if the patient is wearing a mask, the mask will act as source control. So as far as the common man is concerned, a good fitting cloth mask can do the job. So you needn't necessarily wear a triple layer mask. If it is available, definitely the filtering layer within that triple layer mask is more effective. But if you don't have a triple layer mask, a good fitting cloth mask can be used, and you should have at least a couple of masks or maybe 3 masks which can be washed. The one is washed, you can dry it and use it, and you can while it is drying you can use the other one.
Right. I think that really answers most of the question. There are a few questions on the drugs like hydroxychloroquine, and but I think we'll leave those questions apart, because I think HCQ is one drug which is coming off and on, and even the latest ICMR guidelines say that it could be used for the prophylaxis of frontline workers, although there is an article in the Lancet which says that it might have an increased risk to the people who are taking it. So right now I don't think we are in a position to comment on it. So hydroxychloroquine we will leave for the present moment. So
Contact tracing.
yes, so the last one more very important question is, so we have a health worker who turns out to be positive in a facility. So how should we go about contact tracing? I think this is a very, very pertinent question, because this is what is happening in every healthcare facility, whether it's a patient who turned out to be positive or a healthcare provider who turned out to be positive. So how should we go about it? What is the level of panic that we should create or not create?
I think this is a very important question, because ultimately all of us will be doing it in the near future. Contact tracing is very important as a preventive measure, so that we can contain the spread of infection. And so if a patient or a healthcare worker turns out positive, the most important thing is to ask or get the details of their activities that were performed in the past 48 hours, because that is the time we know that, even if the patient, it is the first day of infection, so the patient or the virus is spread 48 hours prior to the patient or the healthcare worker becoming symptomatic. So the virus may be spreading even in a pre-symptomatic stage. So that needs to be noted down in detail, and whoever the patient had come in close contact with, we need to note down that. And by close contact, I mean that the patient or the healthcare worker, whoever has come out to be positive, they need to be within sitting within 1 meter range, and then even the time is specified, like the time spent with the positive person should be at least more than 15 minutes. And so these are two conditions which need to be fulfilled. Plus, if the both of them were not wearing a mask, so these are the conditions which we label as high risk individuals who are at high risk of developing or acquiring infection. So both of them not wearing mask within 1 meter, staying there for more than 15 minutes. If any of these conditions is not present, supposedly they were, either of them were wearing a mask, they were sitting more than 1 meter apart, and they were, there was hardly a minute or two's interaction, these are all low risk, which we really don't need to panic about, because evidence is that there is hardly any transmission of infection in such patients, or in such cases. So for high risk individuals, we usually recommend quarantine for 14 days. Low risk individuals, we only recommend that the person who's at low risk, he should monitor himself for fever or for any symptoms, and report or get themselves tested if they have any sign or symptom. So, and for the high risk, definitely they need to get themselves screened or tested any day beyond day 5. Usually it is between day 5 and day 8, when, if at all they have acquired infection, the virus will be detected.
So thank you, Dr. Gagandeep. I think this was like very, very important for us, because I think this is a situation we are facing every day in our practice. So if either of them is wearing a mask and the interaction has been for less than 15 minutes and they are not in a closed space which is less than 1 meter, then maybe the contact has not been very significant. So we will classify them as low risk.
Low risk. Yes.
So when we say that it is low risk, then would you like to say, like, what should we do with the low risk?
As I said, low risk individuals should just wear a mask, maintain hand hygiene appropriately, and monitor themselves for any signs and symptoms.
Right. So, and the other question that will again come is that if the healthcare provider was wearing a mask but it was not N95, because the patient will not wear N95, but the healthcare provider was wearing a mask, but it was not N95. So should we get worried?
Not really. If at all, again, it depends upon what sort of interaction there was. If the patient was wearing a mask, even if it was a triple layer mask, both of them wearing a triple layer really converts it into a low risk.
Right. So I think that's a lot of clarity on that issue we had with that. So just as we move on towards starting our OPD, there's one very important question which has come up, is how helpful are face shields in the OPD? So Dr. Seema, would you like to say that?
Yeah, OPD is an area where we'll come across the patients and we cannot even implement the clinical screening for all these patients. It's a very high risk area, I would say. So wearing a face shield in this area will be really useful for all of us, over and above the mask which we are using, because it will kind of seal from all the areas which your mask otherwise may not be able to provide. And of course in OPD, when you're wearing a face shield, then also you have to understand that maintaining the proper social distance, avoiding any kind of congestion within your chambers, that has to be avoided. So maintaining social distance and face shield would be really useful for all of us.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Seema. I think that answers most of our questions. So this last one is gloves and face shields are mandatory. So I think gloves are important for the contact precautions. So once we are entering, I think this is one message that we would really like to give, that in the coming time, their patients will increase and we will be coming across obstetric patients, general patients who will be either positive upfront or maybe turn out positive later. So in these times, if we make a rule for ourselves that whenever we are coming in contact with the patients, we have to wear a mask, wear a glove, we wear a face shield if possible, and not wear home clothes, but wear your duty clothes. Right? So if we take these basic precautions, I think that's our first step towards keeping ourselves safe.
Yeah.
So I think with that message, we will close the discussion today if there are no more questions. So thank you everybody. Thank you Priya, Dr. Seema, Dr. Gagandeep and Anubhuti for being there, and the telemedicine for having us here.